Okay, take our chairs. So this debate is actually a debate about parents, not about the government. So as an opening government, we will show you two things. Firstly, why youth embracement is principally just as a parent's role, and secondly, why this teaching to daughter to embrace that independent women will make their daughter better off, and why this is principally why this is the same interest of the women, and why similar to the parents, and why parents should teach these things. So before that, but I'm talking about briefly about the context this debate operates. So we think this debate it can operate everything, but we think the real context, the effective context, is the patriarchy society. Because we think in every single society there is a narrative, but in the patriarchy society there is a norm that women should stay in home, the women should not be independent, that women do not do something else. So there is a strong patriarchy norm. So when in this situation in their society, if the parents say to the teach daughters, you should embrace independent women. So we think this is uniquely effective in that society. So that's why we think we choose the context of patriarchal society, and why this is this is the context we are talking about as a government. So firstly, what is parent's role? So first thing we say as a parent's role is to expand the choice of daughter as much as possible, because we think parent is the only actor to teach about the situation of society or about the future of the daughter. So we think especially in the patriarchal society, the daughter also often listens to the norm that women should stay in home, the women should not be independent. So the only one to teach daughter to tell the different things from the norm is the parent. So the parent should do, because parent is the only actor. So why it is important? Because firstly, if the parent teach that, the parents can expand, and the parent expand the choice of the daughter, because parents know the situation of the society more about comparing with the daughter, because daughter just live for 5 years or 6 years, but the parents live more years, and the parents know the situation of the society, what kind of women the society requires, and what kind of situation the women are facing in the society. So the parent should tell everything in the society, everything to the daughter, and the situation of the society. And society is expanding to the direction that more women should work, and more women should be independent, and more women should be independent in the society. So that's why the parents should teach that situation, and because it will make the situation of a daughter better off, because after they graduate university or after they start to work, anyway the daughter face the situation or face the reality of the society. In this situation, it is important to know that the norm or tendency of the society, and the parents should teach them, and daughter can make their situation better off. So for example, the good example is Japan has a tax deduction for a wife to incentivize to work more and more women to work. So that's why it is, because it is that the government should incentivize to more women to work, because the government want to cut the tax for the deduction tax for women. So we think the general tendency all over the world is women should work more. So that's why we think the parents should teach that situation, because parents is the only actor that makes situation of daughter better off. So secondly, why it make daughter better off, and why this is the same interest, and what's the parents should do. Firstly, in the patriarchal society, the women can't determine their direction, because there is a perpetuated norm that women should not be independent, and women should stay in the home. Even if there is a feminist movement advances to some extent, but it needs more time to make that norm spread. But we think if the parents teach them the situation of the society, what kind of reality they should face after they go to the society, we can change the situation or the choice of the daughter in the short term. That is beneficial. Secondly, it will make the daughter choice expand, and with money and with a connection, because if independent from independent, they can get more money by yourself, not rely on their husband or patron. It is important because they can make easily self-actualize themselves. For example, if the daughter want to get a job in IT company, they have all money, they can go to cram school to get the IT skill, and they go to the interview of the IT company, and they can apply and they can self-actualize by themselves. But if they are relying on the husband or patron, they have to always ask them whether they should do, whether they can give the money or not. So we think at least our paradigm is better because the women have more choices, more self-determination comparing with the situation that the TC is not independent in the society. So that's why we think in our paradigm it is as the parent seeks for the happiness of the daughter. Parent seek the more variety choices for the daughter because more choices will lead more happiness for that daughter. That's why we think if the parents teach that embrace independent women, the situation of women better off, that is the same interest for the parents, and parents should do and should teach that them to make their choices any point of information.
Yeah. Can you give us some actual reasons as to why teaching this idea of independence will lead to more choices for women?
I think it's not sure that the women should obey, or women should obey the teaching of parents. But we think at least if the parents do not teach the actual situation or do not teach you should embrace independent women, these women will have no opportunity to listen to the voice, listen to the information about the actual society. So that's why we think the women at least expand their choices, and that makes situation of women better off. So Madam Speaker, so the honorable chairs in this debate, we think what the OB government teacher told us in this debate, I think the opposition benchmark told us that the parents should expand their choices and parents should not intervene to the daughter choices. But we agree, but especially in the patriarchal society, the context we explained, there is no opportunity for daughter to do that. The women should, parents should expand their choices as much as possible. That is the interest of the parents. So that makes situation of daughters better. That's why we think as a parent, this teaching this norm is absolutely important as a parent's role and make situation of daughter better off. That's why we propose.
We thank the Prime Minister. We now welcome Leader of Opposition. Here.
So the stance from opening opposition is quite simple. We just think we shouldn't push neither masculinity or femininity into their children. That's just the way you are. We are okay that let them consider and help identify themselves, but we are not okay for parents to predetermine direction which is related to the identity. Ultimately, identity is considered only when you experience something. Even though parents know more about society, parents can never be on the shoes of children themselves, therefore they shouldn't predetermine direction the way you are. Three arguments coming from our house. First, even if the idea of independent women could change society and liberate women as a whole, why it is wrong for parents to instrumentalize their own daughter to social mobility. Second, how important dichotomous identity is a psychological torture for children. The premise of OZ is that if parents teach idea of independent women, children can dramatically assimilate and integrate into those ideas. We deny this premise and conclude why identity will collapse and how this will perpetuate not only short-term but also long-term harm for the entire life. Last, even if idea of independent women is dramatically instilled to their children, why it victimizes the vulnerable at the end of the day. First, about how it is wrong for parents to instrumentalize children. Before that, they really characterize that if parents teach the idea of independent women, this can increase choices. Obviously, forced as they consider for daughter and for female in those patriarchal society, it's really difficult to be independent, to get higher salary, well-paid job. It's very difficult for them not to financially rely on their husband, for example. That it's simply wrong for them to say that it can expand choices. It might expand the choice for idea that what kind of identity exists, but it will not expand the choices at the end of the day in the lifetime span. Therefore, it is simply wrong for them to say that teaching and independent women can expand choices. Then closing government or DPM might say like this can change society as a whole in the long run. Why this is wrong? First, in terms of social change, there are obviously better alternative ways for parents themselves to externally emphasize the importance and the idea of independent women in the social movement rally or in like the social media, for example. We don't see why it is uniquely important for parents to instrumentalize their children to change society. But even if it is the only way to change society, we say parents made active choice to give birth and morally obliged to increase the well-being and welfare of the children themselves, then it is wrong for at least parents to impose huge burden, even for like several decades, even if it can change society at the end of the day. Therefore, parents, the primary concern should be maximizing happiness of the children at the end of the day. Second, how imposing dichotomous identity will psychologically torture children? If you have POI.
Yes.
Okay.
So do you think it is also wrong for parents to teach other values to children, such as religious values or things like donating to charity? Is there any value you think it's okay for parents to teach children?
So first, we're happy to oppose any kind of imposing value if it is necessary. But the important thing is that, especially in the patriarchal society, it's really difficult for those daughters to self-actualize if they just become too independent. So that's the point. That's the response. So that's the response. So why imposing dichotomous identity is actually harmful to those children? So there are two specific reasonings why those children cannot smoothly assimilate into the idea of independent women. The first is that as they consider society pushes the idea of femininity to the children. If you watch TVs or if you have any social interaction with the society, like for example, idea of Disney princesses, like being independent, being dependent on the man, or like being like modest against men is like good way for them to be actualized or for them to be happy. The society pushes this kind of idea that femininity or those kind of Disney princess-like idea. And especially when children are emotionally fluctuated, it's very difficult for them to accept both dichotomous identity, which is pushed by society as well as parents. For example, though many boys think like by watching like American comics like Captain Falcons, then really cool and masculine, they might look like Captain Falcon, for example. But when boys can think that wearing pink clothes is enjoyable, or like playing with girlish toys are enjoyable, they might think that they wonder their own sexual identity. Therefore, if parents actually pushes the counter identity, which is going against the social identity pushed by society, it's very difficult for children themselves to identify where you are. Why this is impactful and harmful for those children? Basically speaking, those children cannot find the sanctuary where to rest and where to reside on their own identity. It is not only harmful in the short term, when in the childhood, adulthood, where they have communication with other friends or children or with the social situation, but also it will give perpetual harm for long term as a whole. Because the self-identification in the childhood is the premise that they can have confidence in the longer future, or they can have the ability to communicative skills with other people. If they lack confidence in the childhood and adulthood, it's very difficult for them to believe that society helps you. It's very difficult for them to believe that you worth living in the society. It's very difficult for you to believe that other people can be trustworthy to rely on. Therefore, with this kind of confidence, having confidence and having solid identity is extremely important, even if it's kind of biased imposed by society. Therefore, it's really difficult for them to actualize under their role. And last, even if idea of independent women is dramatically instilled, why it's still victimizing the most vulnerable of the vulnerable? Ultimately speaking, people in society need dependence on something. They cannot be completely independent to live in this world. You rely on social system, you rely on other brotherhood or commonhood who shares identity like religions or races. That's the reason why states facilitate familial relationship or religious community to have identity and to have common feature to embrace their own identity. Then, if parents actively indoctrinate the idea of independent women, what would happen to the vulnerable of the vulnerable? For example, the poorest minority, like racial minority or sexual minority, who are facing quite much difficulty to have financial security to live on, or it's really difficult for them to get academic prestigious universities or to get good job. Then it's really, really important for them to rely on someone like families or parents or other people with romantic relationships. But this strong idea of independent women prevents them from asking help from other people. Then it's really difficult for them to even make the basic living. For this reason, we are happy to oppose.
Margaret Thatcher, the first female Prime Minister of England, was known by her nickname the Iron Lady. Strong, independent, emotionally independent, and has been a role model for generations of women since, not because she was a feminist or part of some movement that specifically advocated long-term change for women. In fact, she was very conservative. But because she was strong and independent and succeeded against all odds in a man's world. And we think that opening opposition, or at least in the LO speech, all they've done is successfully burnt a straw man. They haven't addressed any of the context that Kota gave you in his speech about how it is still a man's world, that patriarchal values dominate, that men occupy 85% of the legislature in Korea and similar numbers in most countries, that men occupy almost all the positions of CEOs and on boards of directors in industry. If we're talking very long term, we also would love to see a world where everyone just has perfect individual choice, equality, and where parents can tell their children, do what you want because society will let you. We don't live in that world right now. And we think the other thing that they've missed is the calculus that what parents have to do is not project some future world that may be better, but project what's best for their child in this world. We think parents absolutely have a duty to indoctrinate their children to some extent in the values that they think will make them more successful, not now, in society that they live in, to make them more successful in terms of competing with their peers, to make them more happy and fulfilled as individuals. So I'll do a little rebuttal before I go on to extend the constructive arguments, both in terms of principle of what parents should do and in terms of why this model of an independent woman is actually a very good model. Before that, yeah, just some rebuttal for some of the things that Elo said that weren't quite so ridiculous. So first of all, yes, it's true. People need to have some reliance on others in a social system. But this is why I said straw man, because we're not advocating a model of independent woman where you simply live as a hermit in isolation and do nothing. We're advocating a model of strong, independent woman that is resilient, that's able to take attacks, that's able to respond with humor when someone tells you go back to the kitchen. And it's like, okay, I'll go back to the kitchen, but you clean the bathroom or something like that, because otherwise too much of a burden. Sorry, that was a stupid joke. Obviously, I'm not an independent woman. But I think you get the point. We want women who are resilient. Like, we don't want Hillary Clinton caving to Donald Trump when he's telling her, like, you're a crook and you have to defend your emails. We want, someone like Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez when people criticize her for dancing, and when she says, oh God, anyway, and when she says that, that's just because you can't dance. That's why you think that we shouldn't. We want someone who's going to respond with humor and then realize that this isn't the issue and move on. So it's not like we're talking about hermits. We're talking about people who actually succeed better because they can be independent, because they aren't so emotionally fragile. The other thing that they've missed, Kota's context. What is the major problem women face? Women face the things like Elo talked about, like Disney princesses that are indoctrinating them with one type of attitude about what they should be. And here's the other part of their straw man. It's not as if people live in a vacuum and never develop any kind of values. It's not as if people only can have one single idea. People are exposed to all kinds of ideas. But the point of the parents is that they should expose with guidance, because they know their child, to the ideas that are going to be most helpful to her. And we're not talking about like brainwashing 5-year-olds and telling them, you have to become the next Margaret Thatcher or Sheryl Sandberg or something. We're doing it at an appropriate time. We're talking about, to a 5-year-old, if you like to play with trucks, Yeah, that's good. You know, maybe you can be a truck driver, be independent on the road. Then when you're a 10-year-old, they can get a little more serious about, well, you know, what kind of job do you like? When they're a 15-year-old, they can say, well, you know, I think, you know, maybe you're being a little too emotional and sensitive about this, you know? Tough up. Sticks and stones can break my bones, words will never hurt me. These are the kinds of things that we think can be introduced in an appropriate way by parents. This is our real case. So, as Kota told you, this is, yeah, okay, I'll take a point.
So regardless of the time setting or when to teach this kind of idea of independent women, when your daughter says, I want to be housewife, you will reject it, this dream. Why this is good for themselves?
Yeah, we're not talking about an absolute rejection either, like, oh, you want to be a housewife, fine, I disown you, and you must leave my home today. No, we're saying that still, parents should, I believe the motion says, that parents should teach their daughters to embrace these values. So, parents should ask things like, why do you want to be a housewife? And maybe, you know, if you're a housewife, you won't earn very much money. Are you happy with that? And get their daughters to think twice, and then encourage their daughter to actually maybe, you know, get a career first and be a housewife later. Okay, so anyway, so the parents' role, clearly this is an actor motion, it's the parents' incentives. In addition to what Kota already told you about their role, there's a game theory aspect here too. Like, if other parents see that in a capitalist society, you know, money and independence equals power, equals status, equals fame, other parents are going to be pushing their daughters. So yeah, in the long term, this might be a bad thing. It might be reproducing a dysfunctional part of society. But still, if we're talking about the parents' motivation, they want to do what's best for their daughter. They want to make sure that daughter is prepared to compete. When the mean girls in school tell her, ha ha ha, you know, you're such a, you know, like a baby playing with your Barbie dolls because you just want to be a housewife, you know, she should be able to tough that out and like snap back to them too. That's what we want. Moving on. So why is this a good model? Again, Kota already told you that part of the reason why this is a good model is because then they can actually get these jobs, they can make money, but to add to that, the idea that they need to have this independence, this resilience to get ahead. In a masculine-dominated culture, where you have things like people like mansplaining and talking women down at meetings, where you have things like men, you know, this was a motion in the preliminary round, like networking around the water cooler and telling, you know, sort of off-color jokes. We don't say it's a good society, but we say it's something that women have to have no fear about entering, leaning in, as Sheryl Sandberg putting it, putting in their voice. This is what helps them get ahead. The money and the power they get from that is itself a powerful instrument of change, because when we have more women with money and more women with power, this also is the counter-narrative that Kota mentioned then, that the reactionary groups and the stereotypes of Disney princesses can no longer dominate the conversation because there are more visible Margaret Thatchers and Sheryl Sandbergs out there to tell people that women can do it. So we don't think in the end that it's counterproductive to a better society, and we do think in the short term the parents' motivations absolutely have to be to teach their daughter the kind of skills that they need to survive in a world which is admittedly not an ideal world. We are very proud to propose.
Thank you, Prime Minister, and now to the opening answer to Leader of Opposition.
Thank you, Chairperson. I don't know why telling girls who are constrained by the idea that girls should be feminine, that girls must be now completely independent, or in becoming a housewife is somehow less valuable as a career than any other alternative that they're going to push, is any bit better for these girls and their happiness, especially in the context of a very conservative society that the Prime Minister points out. We think this is counterproductive, it is very difficult to self-actualize, and therefore it is very, it is only harmful for the children's identity. 3 points coming from my speech. Firstly, I will talk about how the idea of attaching a preferable trait based on gender itself is wrong and how it is harmful. Secondly, I would like to talk about how even if the children opt in and conform to this identity, why it is going to be difficult to self-actualize and affect them negatively. And thirdly, I'd like to talk about the societal consequences and how social norms is unlikely to change through this proposal. All of my reputations are integrated in my speech. Firstly, we think generally speaking, the thing that they're doing basically is telling girls to be more masculine, right? We think this is inherently bad because we need to recognize that the reason why girls have been constrained to the idea that they have to be feminine or they have to be like act in a certain way is because of the idea that gender is something that is there's something that should be attached to gender and guide you as to how you should act. The alternative that we support is that we're not going to push girls to do anything. We're not going to push girls to act in a specific way because we think that in and of itself prevents them from being liberated from the socially constructed idea of gender. Recognize that even if society is telling them that they should be feminine, that Disney princesses are good, the fact that I want to like wear skirts, or I want boys to like me, or I want to use my sexuality to get affirmation from guys because that's what makes me feel good is still legitimate, right? We think parents actively denying that is very, very harmful because we don't necessarily think that for the happiness of those girls, it actually matters. We don't think just because it's something that is socially constructed, parents should actively be denying that sort of happiness that is being gained by this kind of like narrative that is already existing in society. We didn't really see why it is not okay for certain individuals to opt into the narrative that is being socially constructed. We can concede to the fact that social norms is harmful to the extent that it's forcing specific girls to act in certain ways, but we think it is completely legitimate for those girls to opt into that kind of narrative if that is what makes them feel good, right? We think it is completely nonsensical for them to say that, oh, becoming a housewife is somehow less valuable, less happy than becoming like a career woman. Secondly, not now. Not now. So why is it harmful even? So the reason why the first point was harmful is because oftentimes in a very conservative society, children are going to have an identity crisis based on what society is telling them that they should do and what parents are telling them that they should act. We think this mismatch is going to be very, very harmful and something that they're never going to be able to self-actualize themselves because what they're basing their identity on is what society is telling them what they should do and what parents are telling them that they should do. We think we should tell them that you do not have to conform to these social norms, but we don't need to necessarily push things like masculine traits. Not now. Secondly, why is it harmful even if they conform to it? We think the type of independence, the narrative that they're supporting, is things like women must be strong, women must be responsible for their own actions, they must be responsible for things like earning money and so forth. We think this is a fundamental denial of victimhood, right? We need to recognize that in many, many cases, even if women opt into this kind of narratives, and even if they believe that they want to stand up for yourself, and even if they strongly believe that being strong and responsible is the way to go, in many cases, in a very conservative society, that is very, very hard to do. The reason, for example, there is like things like power imbalances. Women might not be able to get jobs. They might not be able to get enough money. They might be suffering from things like sexual harassment or sexual assault or domestic violence or so forth that already exists in the status quo. The idea that girls must always be independent, when that is entrenched in their mindset, we think when they become actually victims of those things, that is very likely to happen in a patriarchal society. The way they're going to react is going to be of self-denial and not being able to call out for help. It is also going to mean that they're not going to be able to support other women who are in more vulnerable situations because their mindset is that, oh, you should be responsible, you should voice out and you should fight back. In many cases, women are not able to do that because structurally they are oppressed. The way we should educate these children is that if that's the case and the structures cannot be changed with their paradigm, the way they should do is not only pushing for independence, but telling them that it's okay to call out for help. It's okay if you have to ask men to get married and have a sustainable that way. And so far as all of their ideas is very good, maybe it is good to be independent, but that is almost impossible in the status quo, and that is why telling them that that's the only way they should act is extremely harmful and denying their own identity. But sadly, let's talk about society, not net. So, because I think all of their premise is coming from the fact that society needs to be changed. Notice that this motion specifies that you are, as a parent, is going to educate your own children. We completely concede to the fact that yes, feminist movements or organizations should be advocating for allowing women to be strong or independent. The problem is, by teaching your own child this, society isn't going to change, right? Especially given the context that the society itself is already very, very patriarchal. I don't think teaching your one child this is going to make any impactful changes, right? What is going to happen in the context of a very, very patriarchal society when this one your daughter having this very, very strong mindset, she's probably going to have extreme backlashes or like a very hard time. Not now. Yes, okay, sorry.
Okay, so your alternatives of like using your sexuality to attract men or being a housewife seem to reinforce all these gender binaries too. Under that circumstance, why shouldn't parents teach their children the skills they need for success in a male-dominated
No,
society?
what we are saying is if they want to do it, they should be allowed to do so. Just because you are a girl, you do not have the obligation to go against the gender binary society. What we are saying is parents should not be impulsive by enforcing a specific trait as preferable. That is something that should be a choice regardless of your gender. You should be able to choose what you want to do. So my last point of social societal consequences is so far is things like girls who speak up not being able to get jobs. There's a very high risk of like getting a lot of backlash. If it's a religiously conservative society, girls who actually speak out might even face like physical danger from expressing opinions. In that kind of context, we don't think as a parent the best way to try to change society or for your own political agenda of achieving gender equality, you should put your child in a position where they feel that the only way to go is to act in a way that might be extremely harmful. We think there are so many other alternatives of advocating for feminism through social movements. We don't really see any justification as to why they can use the child as a tool for everybody to oppose.
Thank the leader of opposition. We now welcome member of government. Here.
Honorable judges, as closing government, we believe that independence is an attitude to proactively define and achieve success, and it's not a certain lifestyle choice. In the opening half of this debate, we've been hearing surface level actualization of what it might mean to be independent. And many of the characteristics analysis that were coming from the opening opposition would actually be a woman wanting to be happy, a woman wanting something different, woman calling for help, woman actively trying to seek the happiness that she wants. We think that attitude is precisely what we are trying to defend here. As parents, we want our children to be able to protect themselves. We want our children to be able to define what it means to be happy. And that is what it means to be an independent woman. So, in my speech, I would like to talk about, three things. First of all, what does it mean to be an independent woman in a man's world, as it has been explained and agreed on by the opening half? Two, what does it mean to be silent as a parent in this scenario? Three, what is the ideal role of a parent in this situation? Oh, actually, so three things. So what does it mean to be an independent woman in this world today? So we think that it's not just a characteristic that is prescribed onto someone just based on their gender identity or just based on the sex that was determined to them. No, but it is an attitude that would most benefit those who are suffering from structural oppression, those who are suffering as minorities. Those are the kind of attitudes that is precisely really important, especially for somebody who needs to voice out what they want, who needs to be able to call out for help, who needs to be able to trade whatever sexuality that she has to gain better economic circumstances, and so on and so forth. So we think that what it means to be independent is firstly, it means to be independent from an oppressive society. Two, what it means to be independent as a woman is to be able to create your own values. As women, we are prone to lookism and ageism so much more than guys. Guys can be handsome even when they're 60, but girls can't be beautiful when they are 60 years old. When you are independent, when you can become independent from certain such value criteria, then you can define your happiness even if you're 60 years old and you are not as pretty as you are. That's what it means to be an independent woman, to be able to create your own values, or to be able to exit an existing value that is really oppressive and is really disenfranchising for certain people. And thirdly, what it means to be independent is to be a free human being. Historically, a woman wanted to be independent because they wanted to be able to make choices, own property, have education, have a right to say a vote in political arena. just as black people wanted to be included in like somebody who has voting, somebody who is being treated as a human being, not as a half citizen, but a full citizen. It does not mean trying to follow a certain lifestyle where everybody becomes Hillary Clinton or everybody becomes Beyonce. No, it means to be, if you want to live in a village and have a really pretty garden, then that is the life that you want and that is the life that makes you happy. And if you are more free from the external factors and external validation that society pushes onto you, then you can choose to make those choices, and that's better. So, fourthly, what it means to be an independent woman is to self-actualize easier than becoming a dependent person, somebody who is dependent on external validation, somebody who relies on other people to tell you that you are beautiful, that you are great, and you are smart. Why? Because if you don't need other people to tell you that you are great, that you are a worthy human being, then when you want something and when you become something, you self-actualize without anybody else's help. Like, you are happy on your own, and you are you create certain community. You are able to make those choices better. And as the government, opening government has clarified, being independent in this society, in this world, is not to live in a solitary island. Like, everybody has a job, and they are not independent in terms of financial compensation that they receive from their companies. So that means that hostesses or people who serve in the sex industry, they are also independent, just as like salaryman. So it doesn't mean, so even if you're studying your own sexuality, even if you're conforming to a certain norm, if you are the one, if you know that you are making a proactive choice and you know yourself that you are happy, then you are an independent woman and you can subscribe to any norms as long as you choose it, and as long as you're happy, that's fine. And as a parent, that's what you need to push for, yes.
So you are seeking utopia, but there's no mechanisms as to how patriarchal society can change. We already told you it just suppresses the identity of individuals, and daughters have to suffer in the long run.
Okay,
how
so
can
first of all, as a parent, it is not our role to change a patriarchal society, but it's our role to teach children how to be able to live the best life that they can in the existing society. And second, well, I can engage in the second point too. So moving on, what does it mean to be a silent as a parent? So maybe this is close to what you're trying to tell me. So being a silent in a society that it will push certain norm regardless of what you do, is to be complicit in a norm that makes women internalize an exploitative system based on one's gender identity. What does that mean? It allows women to be preyed on by women, preyed on by men, to wait for somebody to actually confess to you, or to wait for somebody to want to have sex with you, or to wait for a promotion, or to wait for a turn to speak up for something. So that's the kind of norm that parents would give if they are silent. So thirdly, what is the ideal role of a parent? So we think the role of a parent is to make sure that a child is happy in as foreseeable as possible. But again, parents aren't able to foresee the future, parents aren't able to change the world single-handedly. So what they do is to teach an attitude of independence, of resilience, of somebody who is free, or who is able to think freely from the norms that are around them, somebody who is able to consider all the norms, or consider many choices as possible, and they choose based on what is already existing in the status quo. So for all these reasons, we think that so many of the analyses that came from opening opposition today is actually a denial of people being able to, they're not really opposing us, because being independent is to be able to choose and being able to ask for help, whatever that makes you happy. So for these reasons, we think the motion should definitely stand. Thank you.
We thank member of government, and now we welcome member of opposition. Here.
think that parents are enormously influential in shaping their children's identities. And we think that what we get from the government side is this idea of parents basically changing the world. We don't think that we need to go that far, but neither do we think that we need to go be as modest as opening opposition says. I think opening opposition says that we shouldn't shape identities, but we think that this is an admirable case, but not sufficient because it's too idealistic, because we live on the ground, right? Influence is unavoidable in the real world. So the actual debate becomes what's the goal of a parent raising a child, right? What is the ideals? It's not about a debate about which, it becomes a debate about which ideals we should encourage them to adopt rather than whether we should make these children adopt these ideals. Right? So on that count, right, we're going to say that we want our children to be good people and we want our children to be happy people, right? Being a good person doesn't necessarily mean that you get all of these social impacts as government talks about, but it does mean that you have the best intentions for everyone around you, that you're a virtuous person, that you are an understanding and caring person, a kind person. Right? 3 contributions from our side, right? Firstly, what is the alternative values that we can inculcate in our children to become these types of people? And secondly, right, why happiness is actively damaged when you give them this ideal to embrace, and thirdly, why goodness of children is actively damaged when you give them this, right? So, firstly, what's the alternative value we encourage in our daughters to embrace on closing opposition, right? So opening government and closing government basically say that the alternative to independent womanhood, that is the idea of not showing emotions, leaning into the structures, essentially taking what you want and not showing weakness first and foremost, right, is essentially acceptance of the patriarchy. We reject this narrative because of 3 reasons. We can teach them these things, right? We can things like cooperation, right? Society is more than some of its parts, right? Sometimes you need to basically coalesce with structures in order to change that, right? Secondly, that there are understandings, that there are major issues, major problems in society, but they're really, really complex. That it's not just the individual that fights against these structures, but the structures themselves that need to be changed through individual cooperation. So for example, these complex issues might be things like, domestic abuse in black communities in America, right? The reason why black women don't snitch on their black husbands is because, firstly, because of historical oppression, and they don't want their children, the fathers of their children to be abused by the police. It might be things like, why it's a financial burden to not have an extra breadwinner, right? We can teach our children about all of these complexities without telling them that you should be the sole one to fend off the structures that are so oppressive to your identity. But then thirdly, we can tell them to be altruistic, codependent, and kind to others, right? We can tell them that people are dependent on each other, and you need to be kind to yourself, right? You need to be dependent when you need. You don't need to be emotionally unavailable all the time. You can show emotional vulnerability and still be a good person. That you can work with structures. You can work with your boyfriend, right? For God's sake, right? You can solve these structural problems only when you are codependent, right? That's the alternative narrative that we're going to push, right? Because the structure is the problem, and an individual can never be a solution to that structure, and we need to actively inculcate that in our children for them to be good people and kind people, right? No. Why is this really bad for happiness, right? Patriarchy imposes itself on the female as an onus to carry for the rest of their lives, right? We think that this is an extra onus that we push onto our children, right? So firstly, 2 reasons why. Firstly, it represses emotions and it leads to the inability to communicate your emotions with others, right? This is crucial to living a happy life simply because the most important values that we have in our lives are based on emotional connectedness with those around us, right? Why is this a problem, right? Oral basically says that, the pressure not to show emotions, but we think that the impact is much, much deeper than that, the moment at which you tell them to embrace independent womanhood. Because we think that it shuts down the ability to express your emotions, right? Because you now have an internal constraint from the time that you're very, very young. Your parents tell you, not to cry, right? To basically be strong, right? All the time, and the result is you essentially have the same effect as a lot of men suffering from depression and suicide, right? You're likely to have a lot more daughters basically growing up in a situation where they embrace this idea of toxic emotionalness, and you end up with a situation where they're unable to communicate. So they end up living unhappy lives, not just in their childhoods, but throughout their lives, because they are educated into this idea of non-emotional connectedness, right? But then secondly, we tell you that they lose the ability to proactively shape the world, right? Behind the veil of independence is the idea that the individual stands alone in the world, right? What this does is essentially it stops cooperation, it stops understanding of others. We say that that is some of the most fulfilling experiences that a human being can have, right? They cannot, the trade-off for the personal fulfillment for a few people like Margaret Thatcher that they talk about is literally thousands of women who will be stuck thinking, oh my God, I can't communicate with others. I can't even do this thing, right? I can't climb the ladder, but I can't express my emotions. I can't actively shape the world in the way that I want to, right? Even though the world is oppressive to me, I have to sit still and fight on an individual level. And that's why they're going to lead an extremely unhappy lives, and that's bad. Third contribution. Right, goodness, yes.
Yeah, there's a collective action problem though. As a parent, why should I tell my kid, oh, be vulnerable and cooperative, when Disney is telling them there's only one princess in the realm? And
okay, sit down, 15 seconds, right? Like, so like, the reason why it's not a collective action problem is because like, we honestly don't think that you solve the, because this debate is about parents raising children, right? When you're raising children, your motivation is not to, oh my God, I'm going to make this child like a utilitarian like God, essentially changing and shaping the world, right, all over, right? What we're doing is essentially wanting the best for that child, and that means happiness and goodness. Why is this bad for goodness? Firstly, because it effectively shuts out people. We say that they become more vicious people the moment at which they are unkind to themselves, right? When you're unkind to yourself, you're more likely to be unkind to others. But then secondly, even when you succeed, as government talks about, right? Even when you get that success and self-fulfillment, you're less likely to be generous towards others. So all of the structures that oppress women stay intact when you're at the top of the ladder. Because the moment at which you basically fought your way up, the moment at which you leaned in and became a masculine person in order to become the Facebook CEO, Sheryl Sandberg has literally zero incentive to care about all of the women in Facebook, right? The counterfactual is people like AOC who show emotional vulnerability to voters and people around them, who care about and fight for individuals who will be oppressed by these patriarchal structures for so long. Because we're the only team that actually analyzes the role of the parent and what the parent should want for the child. Very proud to stand in opposition.
We make a member of opposition now to end up this case. Government whip, here.
Honorable adjudicators, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that the opposition bench is mixing up a lot of different ideas into the concept of independence. Independence does not mean not being feminine. Independence does not mean living in solitude, nor confine women into a specific career choice, like becoming a politician or a CEO of a large company. We've clearly told you from a member of government that it is an overarching attitude that becomes a backbone of how you define your happiness in life. And it's kind of sad that closing opposition just kind of dismissed what my partner told you, although it was quite good, to be honest. I'm going to engage within two issues within this debate. Number one, I'm going to talk about whether the range of choice that a woman has in a certain society, or the expansion of choice within that society, would affect the well-being of an individual woman. And I'm going to, the answer to this is, as Susie told you, regardless of whether there's choice or whether expansion of choice happens, attitude of independence is a valuable attitude that you should have. Secondly, how these various narratives that all sides of the House presented affect how a daughter behaves and whether this would make that person happy. Now, moving on to the first issue. Number one, we kind of accept that society in general is still patriarchal. And women unfortunately don't have a lot of choices to self-actualize. So we differentiate between OG in that sense. We don't necessarily think that choices had to be expanded because of women behaving independently. But because of that, we have, my partner and I'm going to tell you that it's
very, very important to redefine the concept of what's in front of you. Because there's a famous feminist saying that we should define the concept of what wearing a bra means. It's not for men, but it's for you to shine in the society. And we have to admit that there's always constraints in this society. So the attitude, teaching them an attitude to become independent, meaning, as in the slide stated, not needing external validation is a core. Because even though men don't like you, if you're not subscribing to the value of lookism, you can still become a happy person by defining that if I like this lifestyle, if I like how I behave, I'm still happy enough, although men don't like me. That's still fine. And especially in the context where female choices are limited, we think that being able to live happily under this constraint is an extremely valuable value to teach to women. So my mentor told you, basically here, it's very valuable because external validation is fragile. For example, what if your husband cheats on you? And if you're dependent on that person, you don't have to feel, you now feel like you're subhuman or you're not valuable. If you're independent, you may like your husband, but the loss of your husband or him going to other women cannot hurt you if you are independent. That enables you to be happy regardless of the circumstance, and that's an attitude that we're pushing forward for. Secondly, moving on to the different narratives. So first I'm going to engage to the MO's point. So what basically he told you is that instead of teaching girls to be independent, we should teach alternatives. And I think he talked to you like teaching cooperation and being codependent. So I'm going to engage to those two things first. And again, I would like to ask you to note that being independent does not mean cutting off others, but like thanking others, but not being dominated by the existence of those. So that's the premise. Number one, teaching cooperation. Not yet. We think it is quite counterintuitive for them to say that independent people cannot cooperate with each other, because independence and the value of reciprocity can still coexist. You do not need people to the full extent that you define your life's value, but you can still respect others as a cohabitant of the society. Obviously, it's very, very counterintuitive to weird to assume that an independent woman refuses to talk to colleagues or have friends. It's only a matter of loss of those people, friends or colleagues, not like ruining your life. So obviously, first it's counterintuitive that daughters would suddenly mess up, but two, this concept of independence still coexists with other narratives, and we don't think that alternative itself is exclusively beneficial on their side. I'll take from open.
For the most vulnerable people, like the color of women in poor community, no matter what parents say, it's impossible to find self-validation under discriminated society. How those people can be actualized under your world?
Okay, we don't really think that if these people are discriminated, they can find external validation anyway. So on a comparative basis, we think trying to be happy on your own is rather better. Nextly, closing opposition told you that to teach daughters to be codependent. Well, okay. The question here that we have to ask you is, are boys and men taught in that way? Because if only women are taught to be codependent and men are not, and they're taught to be masculine and own a woman to be happy, obviously this narrative instilled by parents do not work. So the narrative of codependency only exists if boys are taught in a similar way. They haven't really proved to you why boys can be suddenly codependent within such a patriarchal society and men seeing women as a tool to self-actualize. We don't really think, obviously, that works as a standalone. Moving on to the opening half. So DLO basically told us that independence denies victimhood. We don't really think this is an intuitive argument either, and as a fundamental basis, because obviously rape is a crime and crime is a crime, and it doesn't mean that you being independent, having not asking for any justice, rape is defined as a crime, and standing up against injustice is obviously it comes from common sense, not the concept of independence. So that's why I don't really think that denies victimhood. Secondly, she told you that independent women become denying other weak women. Okay, so we accept that there could be certain possibility that independent woman would expect others to be similar. But again, we don't really think that this is an explicit harm, because in schools, for example, we can teach children and these girls to be kind to unfortunate people and still be cautious or courteous to save these people. So just because they're weak women, it's too simplistic for them to assume that these people will suddenly cut them off as just weak and regrettable people. Lastly, I'm going to re-emphasize my partner's point. So regardless of all that they have talked about, we don't really think that there was an explicit necessity of the narrative that they told you or being silent. We told you that not being silent or going for alternative is clearly being complicit to the toxic norm under the status quo. And for those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that the motion should stand. Thank you. No.
Oh, shut. Oh, no, I did that. I'm so sorry. I was like...
So I think the problem of the opening house and the closing government as a whole is that they actually pursue different values, right? They believe that opening government actually more values social changes and they more focus on that. However, I think the opposition and closing government actually more focus on individual happiness as to why these kind of people deserve more happiness, deserve something, even regardless of the situation of structural oppression. We believe that none of them actually weighed as to what kind of value is more important, as to why social change is more important or why individual happiness is more important. That's why I think it is a deadlock anyway. And we believe that uniquely what the closing opposition does is that we uniquely contribute to both of the issues. Number one, we talk about the reason as to why individual happiness is actually going to be achieved under our side of the house. And secondly, we are actually going to prove to you as to why social changes are actually going to better happen under our side of the house at the end of the day. Before we move on to the clashes, I would like to rebut and box out. I would like to invalidate. I would like to devalue why the closing government's arguments are somewhat wrong at the end of the day. We believe that their major narrative is that under the condition that they are making independent choices, even though they actually opt into being sex workers, that is their independent choice, so that's fine. So I think that's the point coming from the closing government. Number one, I think there actually is, impact-wise, there is no difference with opening opposition at the end of the day. When they say that, hey, it doesn't actually have any problem with you being sex workers if you actually are making independent choices. And secondly, we believe that making independent choices, I think, so there actually is no mechanism as to why these kind of children are actually going to feel independent at the end of the day. Because I think the problem in and of itself is that just because you teach these kind of people to be independent doesn't necessarily mean that these kind of people are going to feel independent at the end of the day. Especially when they actually validate the point that there is structural oppression ongoing right now in the status quo.
Yeah.
Even if they are taught in that such a way that they are independent or whatnot, we don't necessarily believe that they're actually going to feel independent, especially when they are coerced into making certain choices of being housewives, being sex workers, or whatnot. Secondly, and then they try to respond to our case that just because like you are taught with independent choices doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be like shutting down your emotional like cooperation, whatnot. I think they're trying to be like too narrow and they are not trying to bite the bullet at the end of the day. I think the narrative coming from their side of the house obviously is that being independent is saying that you're not weak, you're strong regardless of the situation that you're in. That is the reason as to why we believe emotional sharing is extremely hard under their case, because it only happens when you actually share your emotional weaknesses, right? We believe that saying that I feel bad, I now am very insecure, we believe that these kind of processes are extremely necessary in order for you to share and cooperate in terms of emotion. That's why we believe that the bullet that they have to bite is that emotional sharing and codependence is going to be hampered under their side of the house. And then government will come up to the point and say, hey, men are not teaching that way, so cooperation will not happen. Number one, I think that's a really different debate at the end of the day, because if you actually talk about men and say that like cooperation is not going to happen, we are happy to teach these kind of men into like cooperative manner at the end of the day. I don't think that is a mutually exclusive case. And secondly, even if we bite the bullet and say that we're only going to teach these kind of women of these kind of cooperation, we believe that as still, we can actually bring about a certain social changes based upon cooperation, based upon codependence and solidarity at the end of the day. We think that's a unique benefit that we can anyway bring at the end. Moving on to my clashes. Number one, I'm going to talk about individual happiness. Secondly, about the social changes. Number one, individual happiness. We believe that there was lack of standard as to what exactly is going to lead to happiness, right? I think opening government says that we make more set of choices that automatically leads to more happiness. Number one, no mechanism. Secondly, we actually limit the life choices of being a housewife or sex workers, as the opening opposition has said. Thirdly, we believe that life choice is actually about zero-sum game. That means, for example, if you actually be a politician like Hillary Clinton, if you actually become a women's CEO, you don't actually have enough time to spend with people, spend with friends, and actually cooperate emotionally and try to share their emotions at the end of the day, especially when you have to show that you're as competent as male. We believe that these kind of people actually have more focus and emphasis on their success, their work, and their career. That's the reason why, even under their best case scenario, when they become like very successful in terms of career, they cannot go watch movies, they cannot hang out with their friends and have some coffee and have these kind of casual conversation and have emotional cooperation. That's why we believe that these small things actually lead to happiness and fulfillment, and even though we think so, we believe that they have to sacrifice that in their best case scenario. And that's why we believe that our member is very unique in terms of telling you that there are actually some level of emotional honesty only coming from our side of the house when we actually show our emotions by teaching that you are some person that you can actually cooperate with other people, you can actually be happy with other people by sharing emotions. We believe that emotional dependence and cooperation is only going to happen under our side of the house. We believe that choice is not only confined to issue of narrow issues like career, but rather we believe that choices to actually emotionally cooperate and dependence upon other people is also the set of choices that we have to guarantee as a parent. That's the reason why we believe that our set of choices is really an illusion at the end of the day, right? So I think even under the best case scenario of the government, we believe that they are going to be incapable of emotionally sharing, that because you actually pretend that you don't need these kind of cooperation, you have to pretend that you're strong enough. That's why we believe that we are the only one who gives the insight of human life and human happiness. We believe that the people are not really going to be happy when they only become socially successful and when they only become these monetarily sufficient or whatnot. We believe that happiness comes from emotional comfort and connectedness. That's the reason why we are more than proud to win this clash home. Secondly, about the social changes. OG says that they actually can make institutional changes or whatnot. Number one, even in their best case scenario, when some of the individuals actually be socially successful, they didn't actually prove to us as to why spillover effect is actually going to happen to mass number of the women at the end of the day. For example, just because Hillary Clinton actually become a very prominent politician doesn't necessarily mean that the sex workers are going to be empowered, right? Secondly, we believe that the way and the mechanism as which these kind of people actually became successful is based upon masculine matters, right? We believe that they were actually trying to show masculine power very emotionally concrete and these kind of values that they were actually trying to promote it. That's why we believe that our member was very clear in terms of telling you that. That's why we believe our alternative is very important. We told you that emotional dependence is the only thing that leads to solidarity. We told you that it's important because we believe that these kind of women can now become the very ones to make the meaningful changes. They feel efficacy, they are actually making bottom-up changes. That's the reason why, especially under the context of structural oppression happening, but it is very hard for a single individual to change the social concept and change the social institutional stereotypes. We believe that we are the ones who provide you with more realistic solutions more than proud to propose.